Are you tired of watching Bunjie and I shoot deer under the 100-year-old apple tree? I hope not. Even if you are, watch this video because this one is a little bit different. The 2017 Pennsylvania crossbow season, the 37 days of awesome here in Northeastern Pennsylvania, as I like to call it, is well underway at this point. Bunjie and I are looking to take another doe, or if a buck comes in, take a shot at a buck as well. I already did one other video about the 100-year-old apple tree this year. We had great success there with a very mature, nice, big, fat doe for the freezer, and we're looking to add to that success in this hunt. I got up bright and early, got all set up, and got ready to go out to the 100-year-old apple tree. The weather was perfect, the wind was perfect, and unfortunately, when I got up at 5 o'clock in the morning, well before the sun came up, I look out the window and there's a deer feeding right outside the house. So I'm very worried about that. They're feeding right, we're talking 10 feet from the window of the house. The apple tree is only 100 yards or so from the house. It's actually not that far away, probably 150 yards. And I don't want to spook deer on the way to that apple tree because it will obviously jeopardize the hunting opportunity for that day. So rather than spook deer, I sit around a little bit, I go get some coffee. I'm all set up, ready to go, looking out the window again, and right below the house, in the Buckfield food plot, eating clover, are a few deer right outside where the 100-year-old apple tree is, not very far from the 100-year-old apple tree. So I'm not getting into that apple tree without bumping deer. I'm not having very good luck. That's kind of the story of this season. We've had bad luck time and time again. Remember the Maryland hunting video? Went down there, things didn't go quite as well as planned. Thought I made a good shot on a nice young buck, couldn't find the buck. I really appreciate the support and all the positive comments that I got, the constructive criticism and all the great comments that I got on that video. If you haven't seen that video, go check it out. By the time I finally got in there 11 o'clock in the morning, I was ready to sit the entire day in front of that apple tree. And one thing about apples, the deer will visit that apple tree throughout the day. Probably a lot like acorns if you have a lot of oak trees where you hunt. I don't have any oak trees, but this apple tree does draw deer in and out throughout the day. Bunjie and I sat, we waited patiently, we sat through a little bit of the afternoon, and before too long, the crunching of leaves, the breaking of twigs, and what do we've got? We've got a lonesome doe coming in to look for apples. Now what happened here? That deer runs off and takes my arrow with her. As a crossbow hunter, that does not happen very often. Rarely have I ever had a deer run off with the arrow. In fact, I can see the luminok going through the woods and see where that deer is headed. So I do the best I can to watch where that deer goes, to watch where that deer is headed so that I can predict where that blood trail is going to be. My first thought when a deer runs off with the arrow is, great, I'm not going to have a great blood trail because I don't have two holes. I only have one entrance wound. I don't have an exit wound to spill blood out to give me that good blood trail. So I'm concerned about where this is going. Now I have no problem waiting a little bit. I'm going to let this deer sit for a while. While I did, I heard another deer coming in, and sure enough, a young buck came in to examine the area as well. This is a 4-point. I've posted some pictures of him on our Facebook page, had pictures of him fighting, a little video of him fighting down in the well-pad food plot, and I got a close-up picture of him on one of the trail cameras where you could see the results of that fighting, where he had a cut on his nose. So I was familiar with this deer. It was great to see this young buck make his way through there looking for that doe, and he couldn't find out why she was not there, why she wasn't right there in the area. So he was looking around for a little while, and eventually he made his way out of the area as well. And later in the night, I still couldn't even get out of the blind. I was sitting in that blind and I could hear deer all around me. Sure enough, on the GoPro camera, my second camera angle, what I like to call the field cam, I picked up deer after deer making their way around that food plot, around that area, coming out of the food plot behind me, the Buckfield food plot, making their way along the apple tree or making their way back into the woods. What a great problem to have. I have almost too many deer to go hunting. I couldn't make my way down to the blind in the morning because there were deer right next to the blind. I couldn't get out of the blind at night because there are deer right next to the blind. And in between all of that, I managed to shoot a nice doe. I go back and look at the footage. The shot does not look all that bad to me. In fact, I bet that I've taken this same shot more than a dozen times on deer and had success with it. A little bit quartering too, but if I can tuck that arrow right under the shoulder blade, right in the front of the Bunjie triangle, so to speak, if I can drop that arrow right where I want it to go, if I can do that, that deer is dead. I thought I made a pretty good shot on the deer, and I'm not sure why she's running off with my arrow. Also looking at the shot, it doesn't look like it hit the shoulder blade either, so I'm not too concerned about that. The more I looked at that shot, the more I was convinced it was a one lung and liver type of shot, which is totally okay with me. I've shot lots of deer that way and had good success recovering them. So I was confident that we had killed that deer. So I get my really good flashlight, my brightest flashlight, and I head to the woods. It's after dark by this point. I've let the deer sit for a couple of hours, make my way down into the woods, and start looking around with a flashlight looking for blood. As I suspected, there isn't much of a blood trail, but it wasn't long before I found a nice, big, fat, white belly. I find the deer laying in a doe bedding area that I had made, a little spot that Genevieve and I had cleared out. We did some hinge cutting, posted some information about that on the Facebook page if you're interested in that sort of thing. Over the last summer we did this, kind of opened up the area a little bit to make it attractive for a place where does could bed. They can see a little bit, but they also got a little bit of security. We've got some logs in there so they can back up to the logs. We've hinge cut to try and produce more cover around that little spot, but opened it up big enough so that a few deer can lay in there. Hopefully that was attractive to them. Now I'm not sure whether she crashed on that site or whether she ran to it and laid down. I'm not sure which that is. It's about 120 yards, I'd say, from the 100-year-old apple tree. The arrow is obviously broken off, but you can see that it did not penetrate all the way through the deer, so something went wrong here. I take the deer back up, and when I got that deer, this is what I find out, and this is why this is an interesting video. My broadhead did not open. And I have been the world's #1 critic of people when they say that my broadhead didn't open. And I've always said that because unless you find the deer, how do you know the broadhead didn't open? Looking at it, when I skinned that deer, it became very clear that the entrance hole was small and round, the size of a pencil. I could get my finger in it, and that was about it. Obviously, the broadhead did not open on impact. When I pulled the arrow out of the deer, it was also not open. One of the blades looked like it had opened, but the other two blades were still intact, were still closed. It's obvious to me that the broadhead did not penetrate fully in that deer because it didn't open. When I gutted the deer and looked on the inside of the carcass, you can see where my knife scraped the rib cage when I was cutting out part of the diaphragm, but there's no sign of that broadhead ever making contact with the opposite rib cage. In other words, it didn't even make it to the other side of the deer, let alone pass through. The reason for that, if you look at these broadheads, a closed mechanical broadhead operates very much like a field point. A field point is designed to be blunt and to stop. It's designed to hit the target, penetrate enough to hold the arrow, but nothing more than that. It's designed to not pass through your target. If you look at judo points, for example, small game hunting points, those are designed to not necessarily pass through a squirrel, pass through a rabbit. Instead, they're kind of flat, and what they do is they make contact and they stop. They kill with the concussive force of the arrow, and on small game you can get away with something like that. A closed mechanical broadhead operates pretty much the same way. It's got a chisel tip on it, which isn't fully exposed unless you open up the blades, and those blades are what do the cutting. When the blades are closed, they have flat spots on them that make pressure against the hide, pressure against the inside of that deer, and it was unable to open for whatever reason. Now, I can honestly say, and I'm going to do another video about this very soon, about whether I switch broadheads and what my plans are as far as broadheads are concerned. The big picture is, I have shot a lot of deer with these mechanical broadheads. It is the X-Act mechanical broadhead from Excalibur. I've used them dozens of times and not had this problem. Now, I have lost a couple of deer with this broadhead. Was it because the broadhead didn't open? I don't know. This makes me start to wonder whether the broadhead opened in Maryland. Again, I can't say because I didn't find that deer. Didn't find any blood trail. I got a pass through on that deer, but it's possible that they didn't open on the way through and didn't fully open on the, who knows? Will I switch? Will I not switch? I don't know. So Bunjie and I have our second doe. We have more mountain beef for the freezer. We're gonna have some great chili, some great steaks, back straps and tenderloins, and all the stuff that goes with it. I can't wait to make more mountain beef stew and share that with you on the Facebook page. And don't forget, there's plenty more Death by Bunjie coming this season. We've got the rifle season, which I like to call the second crossbow season. We've also got the late season, designed for flintlock muzzleloaders here in Pennsylvania. But I can hunt during that time with Bunjie with a crossbow as well, and I intend to do so. It's still my goal to one day shoot a deer in Pennsylvania's late season with a crossbow. I can't wait for that to happen, and I hope that you'll join me when that does. So let me know your thoughts on this. Should I switch broadheads? I know a lot of people are going to say go back to fixed broadheads, but I've lost deer with fixed broadheads too, and you don't get the cutting diameter with the fixed broadhead. You don't get necessarily the same feet per second with a fixed broadhead either, because the ones that I would be using would be the bolt cutters. Those are 150 grains, and it will slow down Bunjie, which is already probably one of the slowest crossbows out there anyway. So that's one of the things to take in consideration as well. I'll be talking about all of this in a future video, so make sure you subscribe for future videos. Make sure you like the Facebook page for regular updates. The people on the Facebook page found out about this hunt and the failure of that broadhead a lot sooner, so make sure you like the Facebook page if you haven't already. And until next time, all hail Bunjie!
The second state is number one in my book. Death by Bunjie.